Hi, I'm Tonya. I'm a third-year developmental psychology PhD student and a long-term LEN trainee. Today, I'll be talking to you all about developmental trajectories of caregiver-child, also known as dyadic, synchrony in the context of autism and ADHD concerns. So I'll start by reintroducing you all to Dr. Yuri Bronfenbrenner's bioecological model of development. What you need to know is it's a theory about how children grow up in their environments. Briefly, this theory suggests that exchanges between and within these 5 systems or spheres influences a child's development. Today, we'll be focusing on what's called the microsystem, which looks at interactions between children and caregivers in their most immediate environments, so namely parents in our case, from infancy through the preschool period. So you heard me use the word synchrony earlier. What does that mean? It's related to the word synchronous. So in Greek, syn means together and chronos means time. So it literally means happening at the same time. In the context of research, there are many technical definitions which synchrony can take, and that can encompass neural to physiological to behavioral levels. One common thread between all of these definitions is shared timing between partners in a social interaction. Synchrony can be compared to a dance, and the choreography of this dance changes over time with new moves, rhythms, leaders, partners, and stages. To illustrate this point in the figure on the right, you can see a timeline of synchrony in relation to typical development. At around 3 to 4 months, synchronous interactions are generally led by the infant with the parent following. But by 9 months, synchrony starts to become more mutual, so the lead shifts, with both partners responding to each other's rhythms. At around 1 year, children start using gestures and words to communicate, so they're displaying new moves, which again leads to new rhythms. And our lab is currently interested in synchrony with respect to social communication behaviors, and I'll be talking more about some data we're pulling from Dr. Sally Osanoff's lab to look at that. There are 2 main assessment methods for studying synchrony. One is these general rating scales, which capture the more holistic aspect of the interaction, and the other is this more detailed behavioral coding, which gives us a fine-grained view of the moment-to-moment aspects of the interaction. Here's an example of what synchrony can look like on a fine-grained or moment-to-moment basis. The areas in red show moments of shared positive affect or smiles, which are referred to as synchronous events between the infant and the mother. And the area in gray shows a non-synchronous event where the mother is smiling, but the child is not. Synchrony has been positively related to a range of short and long-term outcomes in domains like social communication, self-regulation, and cognitive development. So when the percentage of time spent in dyadic synchrony increases, scores in these domains, for example, can increase as well. There are certain conditions in which synchrony may be reduced, for example, in autism and ADHD. However, previous studies focused on this early childhood period are limited in several ways. For example, the bulk of this work has been done in infants who are at elevated likelihood for autism, but these infants also display a wide range of clinical outcomes in addition to autism. Additionally, studies have been largely cross-sectional, meaning that they don't tend to follow the same infants over time. And they focused on developmental windows before autism and ADHD characteristics tend to become apparent. Finally, they've used different assessment methods, which makes it challenging to compare results across studies. And they have studied individual child or caregiver behaviors rather than focusing on the pair as a whole. So this leads to a need to clarify the early developmental course of dyadic or caregiver-child synchrony in young children, particularly with those who have emerging autism and ADHD phenotypes or clinical characteristics. Now, why are we interested in studying autism and ADHD together? They have different diagnostic criteria, and although these differences seem to suggest distinct developmental pathways, they also overlap in their clinical presentation, clump together in families, and occur together at rates greater than chance, which all seem to suggest the potential for shared developmental pathways as well. And recent work from the Miller Lab has found evidence for both shared and distinct developmental pathways, with some early markers common to both and others more specific to one. But how are autism and ADHD studied in young children who haven't been diagnosed yet? We use what's called familial likelihood designs, where we follow infants who have and do not have family histories of autism and ADHD. And we use this approach because these family members have a greater chance of eventually being diagnosed with autism or ADHD themselves. For example, younger siblings of autistic children have about a 20% chance of developing autism themselves, which is much larger than the prevalence in the general population, which is about 2%. Similarly, younger siblings of children with ADHD have been found to be 13 times more likely to develop ADHD than younger siblings of children without ADHD. So knowing this background, I'm going to walk you through our study design in a bit more detail. In our study, participants must have either had an older sibling diagnosed with autism or ADHD, or a parent diagnosed with ADHD to be in the respective elevated likelihood groups. In terms of our timeline, we had 5 visits. The first visit was at 6 months, and the last visit was at 36 months. Participants were recruited at 6, 12, or 18 months, and the clinical outcomes, specifically autism or ADHD concerns, were determined at 36 months. I just want to note that ADHD concerns is defined by elevated ADHD symptoms or clinically relevant characteristics across settings, and it is not equivalent to a diagnosis. ADHD is typically diagnosed in older children around the middle childhood period, and we don't do a full clinical evaluation. So this is kind of a proxy for potentially emerging ADHD. And along the way, we administer several assessments, questionnaires, and tasks which measure behavior, clinically relevant characteristics, and development. For our Synchrony task in particular, caregivers were asked to play with their child naturally, like they would do at home, for 3 to 5 minutes, while the examiner was outside of the room, and we recorded these interactions. They were coded in a program called Boris by research assistants who were considered reliable or in high levels of agreement with a master coder. They didn't know the recruitment or outcome group of the child when coding their videos. And coders marks the start and stop of each behavior of interest. So in our case, it was looking to the face, looking to objects, positive affect, or displaying happiness, like smiling, laughter, and vocalizations. And that allows us to compute frequencies and durations for each of our behaviors of interest. And this is an example of how behaviors look when coded on a moment-to-moment basis for one social partner. So this is for the child in particular. And if a given caregiver or child behavior was followed by the same behavior from the other social partner within 2 seconds, it was considered synchronous. And our goal was capturing 3 minutes of uninterrupted play. Now I'll walk you through some preliminary findings. Here are our developmental trajectories across 3 36-month outcome groups: ADHD concerns, autism, and typically developing. On the y-axis is the percentage of time spent in dyadic synchrony. And on the x-axis is visit, or it's approximately the child's age in months of when they were seen. You can see individual trajectories in the background in fainter colors and average trajectories for the group in the foreground in bolder colors. I'm going to zoom in to better compare across our outcome groups. So this is similar to what you've seen in the other graph. They're just all on the same graph, zoomed in without individual trajectories in the background. So you can see at 6 months, the groups don't really differ. But then starting at 12 months, the autism group shows a slower rate of growth and therefore lower levels of the percentage of time spent in dyadic synchrony up until 36 months. I do want to note that the coded behaviors are social communication specific, and they were adopted from previous studies that focused on autism. There may be behaviors that could be more relevant to ADHD to be included in the coding scheme, some of which we're including now, like negative affect, which could be behaviors thought to indicate sadness or frustration. So the main takeaway of my presentation today is that compared to infants developing typically and infants developing ADHD concerns, infants developing autism might diverge in their trajectories of this dyadic synchrony by 12 months of age. And this could have implications for skill development in areas where caregiver-child interactions appear to play an important role. So for example, language development. I want to thank everyone here for having such a great blend here, as well as the members of the Miller Lab and the families who have generously given their time to our studies. Thank you.
The UC Davis Mind Institute was founded in 1998 with the promise to reduce and prevent the disabilities that can be associated with autism and other neurodevelopmental conditions. Every day, our clinicians and researchers make progress on that promise. Our groundbreaking research on autism, Fragile X syndrome, chromosome 22q11.2 deletion syndrome, ADHD, and other conditions associated with disability are helping affected individuals achieve their fullest potential. Please visit our website or our social media platforms to find out more about current studies, upcoming events, and how you can help make a difference.